In 2025, the European Union (EU) finds itself in the midst of an unprecedented energy crisis, triggered by the convergence of multiple geopolitical and economic challenges. Qatar, a vital supplier of liquefied natural gas (LNG), has raised alarms about the possibility of halting its gas exports to the EU in response to the bloc's newly implemented corporate sustainability due diligence directive. At the same time, the expiration of a key transit agreement has led to the cessation of Russian gas flows via Ukraine, disrupting long-established energy supply routes. Compounding the EU's difficulties, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has ramped up trade pressures, threatening to impose tariffs unless Europe significantly boosts its LNG purchases from the United States. These developments underscore the EU's increasing vulnerability within the global energy market, revealing critical weaknesses in its strategy for energy diversification and security amidst a turbulent geopolitical landscape. With depleting gas reserves, soaring energy prices, and rising tensions with key suppliers, the EU faces a difficult balancing act. It must juggle economic stability, sustainability goals, and geopolitical alignment in a rapidly changing world. In this video, we take a closer look at these unfolding events, exploring their complexities and examining their far-reaching impact on the global economy. We analyze the driving forces behind these developments, their immediate consequences, and the potential long-term effects on international markets and trade. Qatar recently issued a stern warning to the European Union regarding its new corporate sustainability due diligence directive, which requires large companies to monitor their supply chains for human rights abuses and environmental harm. Non-compliance with the directive could result in penalties of up to 5% of global revenue. Qatar's energy minister, Saad Al-Abi, emphasized that if such fines are imposed, the country would halt its gas exports to the EU, pointing out the unacceptable financial impact on Qatar's energy sector and its national revenues. This warning comes at a critical time for the EU, which has been actively seeking to diversify its energy sources in response to reduced Russian gas imports due to escalating geopolitical tensions. Qatar has become a key supplier of LNG to Europe, and has plans to substantially increase its export capacity by 2027. The potential interruption of Qatari gas supplies could deepen the EU's energy crisis, especially as the region is depleting its gas storage at the fastest rate since the 2021 energy crisis. The EU's new directive is part of a broader strategy to align corporate practices with its ambition to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. However, it has faced criticism from stakeholders who argue that the regulations are excessively burdensome and may lead to significant compliance costs and legal challenges. In response to these concerns, the European Commission has indicated a willingness to discuss potential adjustments to the directive. In light of these tensions, the EU must carefully navigate its sustainability objectives while ensuring a reliable energy supply. Constructive dialogue with key energy partners like Qatar will be essential for managing the complexities of energy security and regulatory compliance in an evolving geopolitical landscape. The EU's sanctions on Russia were initially aimed at crippling the Kremlin's ability to finance its actions by cutting off revenue from oil and gas exports. By imposing severe restrictions on Russian energy exports, the EU sought to weaken Russia's economy and force a shift in its foreign policies. In conjunction with similar measures by other Western nations, the EU's sanctions were designed to reduce Russia's reliance on energy sales to Europe, which had been a primary income source for the country for decades. However, despite these efforts, Russia has managed to pivot by redirecting its energy exports to new markets, particularly within the BRICS nations and other Asian countries. These regions have become increasingly significant consumers of Russian oil and gas. As a result, Russia has successfully mitigated the financial impact of European sanctions by forging new trade relationships and diversifying its customer base, with its energy exports to non-European nations growing significantly by 2023. China and India together now account for 78% of Russia's crude oil exports, a dramatic rise from just 32% in 2021. Russia's oil shipments to India surged from 4.5 million tons in 2021 to an extraordinary 82 million tons in 2023, while exports to China also saw a significant increase. This shift toward the BRICS nations has not only allowed Russia to maintain substantial revenue from energy sales, but has also strengthened its geopolitical ties with these countries, further solidifying its position in the global energy market. This reorientation of trade flows has had a profound impact on global energy supply chains. As Russia increasingly caters to the energy demands of China and India, these nations have responded by ramping up their oil product exports to Europe, effectively filling the gap left by Russia's absence. For example, India's refined oil exports to the EU tripled from 2021 to 2023, and by 2024, India had become one of Europe's top suppliers of refined fuels like diesel. In 2024, Saudi Arabia emerged as a key importer of Russian oil, driven by a combination of domestic energy needs and regional market factors. In August 2024, Saudi Arabia began importing an average of 510,000 tons per month of Russian fuel oil, around 3.4 million barrels. This increase was primarily due to soaring domestic electricity demand during an exceptionally hot summer, which prompted Saudi Arabia to seek alternative fuel sources. By November 2024, Saudi Arabia became the leading buyer of Russian seaborne fuel oil and vacuum gas oil, securing its energy supply amid shifting regional dynamics. This shift could influence Saudi Arabia's oil production strategies and pricing, with potential implications for global oil supply and demand. As of January 1, 2025, the agreement that allowed Russian natural gas to transit through Ukraine to Europe has expired without renewal, raising serious concerns about energy security in Europe. Gas reserves are being depleted at an alarming rate, and benchmark gas prices spiked to their highest level in over a year. Preliminary data for January 1st indicated that no transit bookings were made on the vital pipeline that has been a cornerstone of European gas supply for 50 years, including nearly 3 years since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Several Central European countries that depend on these flows will now face the challenge of sourcing more expensive alternatives, adding pressure to an already strained supply system. The region is depleting its winter gas reserves faster than in previous years, further escalating the crisis. Despite months of negotiations, efforts to renew the 5-year-old transit deal have faltered. While Ukrainian gas shipments now represent only about 5% of Europe's overall gas needs, the potential loss of this supply underscores the long-term effects of the energy crisis triggered by the war. Europe's continued dependence on Russian gas, both via pipelines and liquefied natural gas, exposes vulnerabilities in the European Union's strategy to reduce reliance on Russian energy. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has pledged to phase out Russian fossil fuels by 2027, downplaying the impact of the transit deal's expiration on the region's energy markets. However, countries like Hungary and Slovakia have strongly opposed the cessation, with Slovakia, in particular, leading a contentious push to maintain gas flows. In 2009, a similar disruption occurred when Russian gas transit through Ukraine to Europe was halted for nearly 2 weeks during a bitter winter dispute. The situation was resolved after the two countries reached a new agreement. A similar, though shorter interruption happened in 2006. The current agreement, set to expire at the end of 2024, was itself the result of last-minute negotiations in 2019, and the ongoing war reduces the likelihood of a swift resolution. Last week, Russian President Vladimir Putin acknowledged that there wasn't enough time to finalize a new deal before the year's end. Adding to the complications is a lawsuit from Ukraine's Naftogaz, accusing Gazprom of failing to pay for transit services. Some European nations are also wary of proposals to reclassify Gazprom's gas as non-Russian. Meanwhile, regional energy firms have explored alternatives, such as taking ownership of gas at Ukraine's border, or arranging a complex swap facilitated by Azerbaijan's energy firm, SOCAR. Despite this, Russia continues to supply gas to countries like Serbia and Hungary via the Turk Stream pipeline, which bypasses Ukraine. However, this route is insufficient to make up for the loss of the Ukrainian transit corridor. Other options, like the pipeline through Poland, are no longer viable, as it has been shut down, and the Nord Stream pipeline, which connected Germany to Russia, was severely damaged by explosions in 2022. The newer Nord Stream 2 pipeline has yet to receive operational approval from Berlin. If you're enjoying the video so far, please take a moment to hit the like button. If you want to help even more, leaving a comment would really make a difference. Your support helps us reach a broader audience and improve our content. Thank you. Now, let's get back to the discussion. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico has called on the European Commission to address the potential halt of Russian gas transit through Ukraine. He warned that the economic consequences for the EU would far outweigh the losses Russia might face. In a letter to Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, Fico criticized Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky for threatening to block Russian gas flows, stating that while this action targets Russia's war efforts, it could severely harm Europe. Fico projected that European consumers could see an additional 40 to 50 billion EUR in annual gas costs, along with 60 to 70 billion EUR in higher electricity bills. On the other hand, he estimated Russia's financial losses at around 2 billion EUR annually. Fico also suggested the possibility of reducing electricity exports to Ukraine, though he did not provide specific details, urging the EU to take rational action to prevent self-destructive measures that could harm Europe. Ukrainian President Zelensky condemned Fico's threat to halt electricity exports, accusing him of siding with Russian interests. Zelensky warned that cutting off gas transit through Ukraine could cost the EU 120 billion EUR over 2 years. He also claimed Fico had made covert agreements with Russian President Vladimir Putin. In response, Zelensky suggested that Ukraine might block Russian oil transit via the Druzhba pipeline if the electricity threat escalates. He criticized Fico's policies as short-sighted, warning that Slovakia could lose out on compensation from gas transit revenues due to geopolitical and economic shifts. The situation has disrupted a key energy supply route, historically providing about 5% of Europe's natural gas needs. This raises concerns over energy security and economic stability across the continent. The potential cessation of Russian gas flows through Ukraine is expected to drive up energy prices in the EU. European natural gas benchmark prices have already risen in anticipation of this change, reflecting market worries about supply shortages. According to the Financial Times, this disruption has led to higher demand for alternative energy sources, such as liquefied natural gas, LNG, which are typically more expensive. Countries heavily reliant on Russian gas through Ukraine, such as Slovakia and Hungary, are particularly vulnerable and may face higher energy bills, leading to public dissatisfaction. The rise in energy costs is likely to have a direct impact on EU consumers. Higher natural gas prices could result in increased household utility bills, cutting into disposable income and possibly reducing consumer spending. Industries with high energy demands might also experience higher operational costs, which could be passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices for goods and services. On the international front, President-elect Donald Trump has issued a warning to the European Union, stating that the EU must significantly increase its purchases of American oil and gas or face trade tariffs. This ultimatum is part of Trump's broader strategy to address trade imbalances and boost the U.S. energy sector. In a post on Truth Social, Trump declared, "I told the European Union that they must make up their tremendous deficit with the United States by buying large amounts of our oil and gas, or else it's tariffs all the way." The United States has been running a trade deficit with the EU, importing more goods and services than it exports. Trump's statement highlights his administration's focus on reducing this deficit, particularly by increasing energy exports. The EU has been diversifying its energy sources, especially in light of geopolitical tensions and the need to reduce dependence on Russian energy. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the US has become a key supplier of LNG to the EU, with exports tripling since 2021. In the first half of the year, the US accounted for nearly half of the EU's LNG imports. Trump's threat of tariffs raises concerns about a potential trade war, which could disrupt trade relations and increase costs for European consumers. European Commission spokesperson Olaf Scholz responded by emphasizing the interconnected nature of the US and EU economies, expressing openness to discuss further cooperation, including in the energy sector. The EU-Russia energy relationship has undergone significant changes since the 1960s, with Russian exports once being a cornerstone of Europe's energy supply. However, following Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 and the 2022 Ukraine conflict, the EU has worked to reduce its reliance on Russian energy. The current halt in gas transit through Ukraine adds to the urgency of finding alternative energy sources. The EU could face an additional 120 billion EUR in costs over the next 2 years due to new supply routes and infrastructure investments. These adjustments will take time and resources, possibly leading to energy shortages and economic disruptions in the short term. As we look toward 2025, the energy crisis in the EU is expected to intensify due to a range of factors, including the halt of Russian gas supplies, increased tensions with Qatar, and the shifting dynamics of global energy markets. With Russia no longer a major supplier, the EU will face high energy prices and increased reliance on alternatives like LNG. Though these come with their own challenges, the US is playing a growing role in the EU's energy future, but the threat of tariffs adds uncertainty to the volatile energy market. As the EU grapples with maintaining energy security, it faces tough decisions that will affect both consumers and industries. The rising cost of living, combined with higher energy prices, could stifle economic growth. Moreover, political uncertainties, including the incoming Trump administration, could further complicate the situation. Trump's policies might introduce tariffs on energy imports or trade barriers that disrupt existing supply chains and increase costs, creating more pressure on Europe's already fragile energy system. That's all for today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest content. We've also suggested some other videos you might find interesting. Be sure to check them out. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.